Awesome, sweet, lovely. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna be filling this out. These are the stability factors. So each thing you have to take into account if you were to look at a hill or a slope of any kind. And we're gonna talk about how you can make it more stable or how you can make it less stable for each of these factors. And so I would love for you guys to be following along on your own worksheets. So to make slope angle. So slope angle is the actual like hill itself. So slope angle. So if we were just to look at like this here, that is the side of the slope, the actual part that you would be walking on. And so if that is equal to or less than the angle of repose, that will make it more stable. Here, let me do this where I put these in bold again, because it's easier to read. All right, so it is more stable if it is equal to or less than the angle of repose. So you want it to be less steep. Equals more stable. Now, if you want to make it less stable, if you want the slope to collapse, you would want the angle to be higher than or more than the angle of repose. All right, so more steep equals less stable. And so that should make sense. Imagine building a pile of sand. The more steep it is, the more likely it is to collapse. All right. And we've talked about the angle of repose. That is the steepest that it can possibly get to be as it's stable. So it's just like the natural angle that it would prefer to rest at. All right, water saturation to increase stability. Some water content, not too much, not too little, helps with cohesion. Cohesion is the sticking together of the grains. So damp equals more stable. But if you have too much water, it'll flow. If you have too little water, not enough friction. And so too wet or too dry equals less stable. Permeability and porosity. So you need water to be able to seep in, but not too much. So you need, this kind of helps contribute to this up here. So some water, it's called infiltration when water soaks in. Some water is needed. So medium porosity and permeability equals more stable. Let me fix that. Permeability. But impermeable or no porosity or too permeable or high porosity equals less stable. Because what this will do is absolutely no water able to soak in. It's just going to wash off the top and create a flood. If too much water is able to soak through, the water just goes straight through and there's not enough moisture. So you need a little bit of porosity and permeability so that water can slowly soak in. All right. Now, if you have a slope and it's completely made out of dirt, it's not going to be very stable. However, if your slope is mostly made out of bedrock, it's going to be super stable. So solid materials equals more stable. For example, bedrock. While unconsolidated materials, and you notice how the word solid is in here, are less stable. So for example, sediment, what's that stuff that they build San Francisco on? Basically reclaimed land. Anything that's not solid bedrock is going to be less stable. Okay. Thickness of regolith. So this is above the bedrock. You're going to have at least some dirt and materials below the soil. And if that's on a slope, the thicker that is, the more water it can hold and the heavier it can get, and the more likely it is to slide. And so if you have bedrock, 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 and then a nice thin layer of regolith, it's less likely to fail. So thin layer of regolith equals more stable. A thick layer of regolith can get too heavy, less stable. All right, now bedding orientation. Now this one I really got to show you. So here is some bedding. And if I were to, let's draw. If I were to draw, here's the slope, and here is the bedding angle. All right, the closer to 90 degrees this is, the more stable this slope is. And I'll show you another example. Let's scroll up a bit. Can I scroll up a bit? This one. All right, so let's say I am walking up this part of the slope. You know, so like I'm actually walking up that, and the bedding angle is almost horizontal. It's almost parallel to the slope. This whole thing could slide off and fail. And so the more parallel to the slope the bedding angle is, the less stable it is. And I want to show you guys, I want to remind you guys of something earlier in the week. Here's the slope on one side, here's the slope on the other side. Here, the bedding angles are almost perpendicular. This is actually more stable. While over here, the bedding angles are parallel. This is actually less stable. This whole thing could fail at one of these bedding planes, and the whole thing could slide down. And so, clear the drawing, go back to my mouse. If the bedding is perpendicular to the slope, it is more stable. Let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit and put these in bold, and then I'll scroll back up just a little bit. Boop, 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 boop. Let's spell slope correctly, shall we? While if the bedding is parallel to the slope, it is less stable. Again, why do I keep forgetting the E? All right, now it's time for vegetation. Remember what vegetation does with the roots? More deeper rooted vegetation. I keep wanting to write vegetables. Vegetation equals more stable. It's literally holding the slope together. So less or shallow roots or heavy vegetation equals less stable. So if you've got bushes that don't tend to reach down really deep with their roots, but they add a lot of weight, that's not good. And then obviously tectonic activity, less shaking, less activity is going to be more stable, while more shaking and more activity is going to be less stable. All right. So that is how we fill out these. Let me zoom out just a bit to try to get them all on the screen at the same time. Let's do 125. Yeah, look at that. I can get them all on the screen at the same time. All right, so those are the stability factors. We've got slope angle, water saturation, the permeability, porosity, the slope composition, the thickness of the regolith, the bedding orientation, the vegetation coverage, and the tectonic activity. Those are the factors that can determine whether or not a slope is stable or unstable. All right, here in blue, I've got all of the things to make it more stable. A less steep angle, more stable. Just enough water saturation, more stable. Enough permeability and porosity for that water to be able to soak all the way through and stay, more stable. If the slope is mostly made out of solid bedrock, more stable. If there's a thin layer of regolith that's less likely to gain weight and slide off, it's more stable. If the bedding is perpendicular to the slope, it's more stable. If the vegetation has really deep roots, it's more stable. And if it's not in an area that shakes a lot, then it's going to be more stable. The factors that will decrease stability: if you try to make it steeper than the angle of repose would naturally be, it's going to be less stable. If there's too much water in it, it'll flow like water and be less stable. If there's no water in it, it'll be too dry and it'll be more likely to blow away or collapse. If it has, that's less stable. If it has no permeability, if water can't soak in, then it's more likely to rip the top off it during a flood and destroy it. If it's too permeable, the water goes straight through it, and so it can't hold on to enough water to stay moist. If that's less stable. So slope composition, if it's made of just like sand or debris, if the entire thing is made of soil or regolith, it's going to be less stable. If the regolith itself on top is too thick, it can hold on to too much water and it can fail, making it less stable. If the bedding is parallel to the slope itself, that whole chunk can slide off. It's less stable. If there's either no vegetation or the roots are super shallow, making it super heavy on top, that would be less stable. And if you're in an area that has a lot of earthquakes, it's less stable. All right, so that is the slope stability factors. All right, so let me go